In the beginning, when the earth was still young in the counting of human years, there lived a man whose name was Noah. His name meant rest or comfort, and perhaps there was something in that name that spoke of what was to come. But that is a story that unfolds slowly, like the turning of seasons, like the patient growth of ancient trees. This is a peaceful retelling of Noah's story from the book of Genesis, meant for rest and quiet reflection as you settle into sleep. To understand Noah, we must first understand the world into which he was born. We must go back, gently back, through the generations that came before him. We must walk softly through the long years when people lived for centuries, when the earth was filled with the children of Adam, when the memory of the garden was still spoken of in whispers around evening fires. There was a man named Adam, the first man, formed from the dust of the ground. Adam lived 930 years, and he had sons and daughters. Among his sons was Seth, born after the death of Abel, when sorrow had visited the first family. Seth grew and became a father himself, and he lived 912 years. Seth had a son named Enosh, and in those days people began to call upon the name of the Lord. The earth was still new then, still finding its rhythm. Enosh lived 905 years, and he too had sons and daughters. The pattern continued, generation after generation, like links in a long chain reaching back to the very beginning. There was Kenan, who lived 910 years. There was Mahalalel, who lived 895 years. There was Jared, who lived 962 years. These were the generations of old, when time moved differently, when years accumulated like drops of water filling a great vessel. Each man lived and worked and raised children, and then passed on, making room for those who came after. Among these generations, there was a man whose story stands apart, gentle and mysterious. His name was Enoch, and he walked with God. That is how the ancient account describes him. He walked with God, not striding ahead or lagging behind, but walking alongside, in step, in rhythm, in quiet companionship. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. And after Methuselah was born, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. All the days of Enoch were 365 years. And then, the account says simply, he was not, for God took him. There is something peaceful in that telling. No struggle described, no lengthy farewell, just a walking with God, and then a gentle transition from this world to the next, as though the boundary between them was as thin as morning mist. Enoch's son Methuselah lived longer than any other person recorded in those ancient genealogies. He lived 969 years, nearly 1,000 years of seasons, of harvests, of watching the sun rise and set. Methuselah became the father of Lamech, and Lamech in turn became the father of a son. When that son was born, Lamech looked at the child and spoke words of hope. He said, "This one shall comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." And he called his name Noah. This was the world into which Noah was born, a world already ancient, already filled with the accumulated weight of many generations, a world where people still remembered the stories of the beginning, but where those stories were growing distant, like mountains seen from very far away. The earth in those days was not as it would later become. After the flood, the world would be washed clean and reshaped. But in Noah's time, the land was different. The climate was likely more uniform, more temperate. There may have been no rain as we know it, but rather a mist that rose from the earth and watered the ground. This is suggested in the ancient account, though we can only imagine what such a world would have looked like. People lived longer then. Whether this was due to the environment or to something in the nature of those early generations, we cannot say with certainty. But the years stretched out, and Noah grew up in a world where his grandfather Methuselah still walked the earth, where the stories of the past were told by those who had lived them. Noah would have learned the ways of working the land. In that time, people cultivated the ground, raised animals, built homes, and lived in communities. The technology was simpler than what would come in later ages, but people were not simple. They had language, culture, family structures, and the capacity for both great good and great evil. As Noah grew from childhood to manhood, the world around him was changing in ways that were hard to see at first, like the slow spoiling of fruit. The account tells us that people began to multiply on the face of the earth. Daughters were born to them, and something began to happen that troubled the order of creation. The account speaks of this carefully, almost reluctantly. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. There is much that is mysterious in these words, much that has been pondered across the centuries, but the essential meaning is clear enough. Boundaries were being crossed, proper order was being abandoned, and the consequences would be severe. The Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Whether this meant that humanity would have 120 years before judgment came, or that human lifespans would eventually be reduced to that length, the message was one of limitation. There would be an end to the patience being extended. In those days, the account tells us, there were giants on the earth. These were mighty men of old, men of renown. The world was full of strength and ambition, full of people who made names for themselves, who were remembered and spoken of with awe. But something was deeply wrong beneath the surface of all this strength and fame. The Lord looked upon the earth and saw that the wickedness of man was great. Every intent of the thoughts of people's hearts was only evil continually, not occasionally, not in moments of weakness, but continually. The account tells us plainly that the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Grief, that is the word used. The sorrow of a maker seeing his creation turn away from its intended purpose, seeing beauty become ugliness, seeing potential wasted and goodness rejected. But in the midst of this nearly universal corruption, there was Noah. The account says simply, "But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." One man. In a world filled with people living for their own pleasure, their own power, their own desires, there was one man who was different. Not perfect, for no human being apart from Christ has ever been perfect, but different, set apart, responsive to God in a way that others were not. Noah was a just man, the account tells us, perfect in his generations. That word perfect does not mean sinless, but a rather complete, whole, having integrity. Noah walked with God, just as his ancestor Enoch had walked with God generations before. There is something beautiful in that repetition. Enoch walked with God. Noah walked with God. Across the centuries, across the accumulated corruption, the possibility remained. A human being could still walk in step with the divine, could still maintain that relationship for which humanity was designed. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Their names are recorded carefully in the genealogy, for they would matter greatly in the days to come. Through these 3 sons, the earth would eventually be repopulated. Through their descendants, all the nations of the world would come. But in the time we are considering now, they were simply Noah's sons. Young men growing up in a world that was beautiful and terrible at the same time, learning from their father what it meant to be faithful when others were not, watching him live differently than the world around them lived. We do not know much about their childhood, about their mother, about the daily rhythms of their household. The account is spare, giving us only what we need to understand the larger story. But we can imagine the quiet steadiness that must have characterized Noah's home, the teaching that must have taken place, the example that was set day after day, year after year. God spoke to Noah. In that corrupted world where most people had turned away from their Creator, God spoke to one man and told him what was coming. The end of all flesh had come before him, for the earth was filled with violence through them. He would destroy them with the earth. Violence, that is the word emphasized. Not just wickedness in thought, but violence in action. The corruption had moved from the heart to the hand, from thought to deed. But even in announcing judgment, God was also announcing salvation. He told Noah to make himself an ark. He gave specific instructions, careful and detailed. The ark was to be made of gopher wood, a term whose exact meaning is now lost to us, though it clearly referred to some kind of sturdy, durable timber. It was to have rooms inside. It was to be covered with pitch inside and out to make it watertight. The dimensions God gave were precise. The ark was to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. A cubit was the length from a man's elbow to his fingertips, roughly 18 inches. This means the ark would be approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Enormous by the standards of the time. Enormous even by modern standards. It was to have a window, finished to a cubit from the top. It was to have a door in its side. It was to have 3 decks, lower, second, and third. Every detail mattered. This was not to be a simple raft or a hastily constructed shelter. This was to be a vessel capable of surviving catastrophe, of preserving life through what was coming. And God told Noah why he was to build it. I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. The judgment was certain. The world as it existed would not continue. But there was mercy in the midst of this. But I will establish my covenant with you, God told Noah, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. 8 people. Out of all the multitudes on the earth, 8 would be saved. Noah and his wife, Shem and his wife, Ham and his wife, Japheth and his wife. 3 generations together, entrusted with the future of humanity, and not just the humans. Noah was to bring into the ark 2 of every living thing of all flesh, male and female, of the birds, of the animals, of every creeping thing. 2 of every kind would come to him to be kept alive. He was to take food for himself and for them, storing up provisions for a long confinement. This was an act of preservation. Even in judging the earth, God was preserving the earth. Even in bringing an end, he was making possible a new beginning. The animals were not guilty of the corruption that had infected humanity, and they would be spared. And Noah did according to all that God commanded him. That simple statement carries enormous weight. He did it. He obeyed. In a world where no one else was listening to God, where the dominant culture had turned its back on righteousness, Noah simply did what he was told. We are not told how long it took to build the ark. The account moves quickly past the construction phase, assuming we understand that such a project would take years, perhaps decades. Later tradition suggests it may have taken 120 years, the period of time God had mentioned when he spoke of his spirit not striving with man forever. Imagine the work involved: the felling of trees, the hauling of timber, the measuring and cutting and fitting, the slow accumulation of pitch to seal the seams, the construction of rooms and decks, the building of a door large enough to admit the largest animals. And imagine doing all of this while the world around you carried on as it had been, while others laughed or ignored, or perhaps even wondered, while life continued in its ordinary patterns, and nothing seemed different from one day to the next. Noah had to procure the materials. In that time, there were no suppliers delivering lumber. Everything had to be obtained from the land, processed by hand, moved into place through muscle and persistence. He likely had help. His sons were grown men, capable of hard labor. Perhaps he hired workers or persuaded relatives to assist. But the vision was his, and the responsibility was his, and the faithfulness required was his. Day after day, week after week, year after year, the ark grew, slowly, steadily, like a living thing taking shape. The skeleton first, then the ribs, then the planking. The pitch applied in layers, sealing it against the water that would come. The internal divisions created, making spaces for different kinds of animals, for food storage, for the families who would shelter there. The work itself would have had a rhythm to it. The swing of the axe, the rasp of the saw, the pounding of wooden pegs, the smell of fresh cut wood and sticky pitch, the satisfaction of seeing the structure take form, of knowing that each day's labor brought the task closer to completion. We do not know what Noah's neighbors thought. The account does not tell us. But there is an ancient tradition that Noah warned his generation about the coming judgment, that he spoke of righteousness while he built, that he offered them the chance to change, to turn away from violence and wickedness, to seek God while he might still be found. Whether anyone listened, we do not know. The fact that only 8 people entered the ark suggests that if Noah did speak, his message was not received. The world had made its choice. There is something sobering in this. Truth does not win by popular vote. Righteousness is not determined by consensus. Noah was right, and everyone else was wrong. But being right did not make Noah powerful or influential. It simply made him right. And in the end, That was what mattered. As the years passed, as the ark grew, the world around it continued in its patterns. People married and were given in marriage. They ate and drank. They bought and sold. They planted and built. Life felt normal to them, permanent, unchanging. This is the nature of such times. The comfortable patterns of ordinary life create an illusion of stability, a sense that tomorrow will be like today, and next year will be like this year. The fact that something has not happened yet can feel like proof that it never will happen. But God's patience is not the same as God's absence. His delay is not the same as his denial. The ark kept growing, and the day appointed drew closer, invisible but inevitable, like dawn approaching in the darkest hours before morning. Noah's faith was quiet and steady, not the faith of ecstatic visions or miraculous signs, but the faith of daily obedience, of getting up each morning and doing what needed to be done, of trusting that God knew what he was talking about, even when the skies showed no sign of storm. This is the kind of faith that sustains, not the dramatic moment of conversion or commitment, important as those moments are, but the daily choice to keep going, to keep trusting, to keep obeying, to keep building, one board at a time, one day at a time, 1 year at a time. Noah's wife, whose name is not recorded in the account, must have shared this faith. To watch her husband spend decades building an enormous boat, to endure whatever social consequences came from being part of Noah's household, to prepare for something no one else believed was coming. This took faith as well, and the sons and their wives. They too had to believe. They too had to trust that their father was not mistaken, that God had truly spoken, that the ark was necessary and would indeed save them. They had to help with the work day after day, even when it seemed strange to everyone around them. The account tells us that Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. 6 centuries of life. He had seen much in those years. He had watched the world grow more corrupt. He had remained faithful when faithfulness was rare. He had raised his sons to follow God. He had built the ark. And now the time was approaching. The time when theory would become reality, when warning would become event, when the long work of preparation would be tested. But we are not there yet in our story. We are still in the time of building, of waiting, of steady faithfulness. We are still in the years when Noah worked and trusted, when the ark grew and the world went on its way, when judgment was certain but not yet present. Let us rest here for a moment, in this space between promise and fulfillment, between warning and event. Let us consider Noah's quiet faith, his patient obedience, his willingness to stand apart and trust God even when doing so made no sense by the standards of the world around him. There is something to learn here, in this restful pause. Something about the long arc of faithfulness, about trusting God's timing rather than our own, about doing what we are called to do, even when we cannot see the results, even when others do not understand. Noah built because God told him to build. He prepared because God told him to prepare. He believed because God had spoken, and that was enough. The days passed slowly in that ancient world. The sun rose and set. The seasons turned. The crops grew and were harvested. Children were born. The old died. Life continued its patterns, its rhythms, its familiar cycles. and the ark sat there growing larger, more complete, more ready. A testimony to something the world had forgotten. A preparation for something the world refused to believe. A sign of both judgment and mercy, of both ending and beginning. Noah's hands were rough from work. His face was weathered by sun and wind. His back knew the ache of long labor, but his heart was at peace. He had heard God's voice, and he had obeyed God's command, and that obedience had brought a deep, abiding rest. This is what his name meant after all: rest, comfort. And in the midst of a violent, corrupt world, Noah had found that rest in obedience, not in escape from hard work, but in the peace that comes from walking in step with God. We do not know all the details of those years. The account is selective, giving us what we need, but not everything we might wonder about. We do not know exactly how Noah explained his project to others. We do not know what arguments he faced, what ridicule he endured, what doubts he wrestled with in the quiet hours of the night. We know only that he continued, that he did not give up, that when God said to build, he built, that when God said to prepare, he prepared, that when God promised judgment, he believed, and that when God promised salvation, he trusted. The story of Noah in these years is not a story of drama and excitement. It is a story of faithfulness, of persistence, of quiet courage, of choosing to believe God rather than the culture around him. There is something peaceful in contemplating this long season of preparation, the steady rhythm of work, the slow accumulation of progress, the patient waiting for God's timing to unfold. No rushing, no panic, just daily faithfulness. This is the kind of story that settles the mind, that reminds us that God's work is often slow by human standards, that what matters most is not speed, but faithfulness, not immediate results, but persistent obedience. Noah walked with God. As Enoch had walked with God generations before, so Noah walked with God in his own generation. In a world that had lost its way, Noah found the path. In a time of corruption, Noah maintained integrity. The pitch that sealed the ark had a smell to it, sharp and distinctive. The fresh timber had its own scent, clean and strong. These were the smells of Noah's world during those years of building, the physical reality of spiritual obedience. Every board placed was an act of trust. Every room completed was a statement of belief. The ark itself was a three-dimensional sermon, a massive declaration that God's word was true, and his judgment was certain, and his mercy was available to those who would enter. But the door was not yet closed. The animals had not yet come. The rain had not yet fallen. We are still in the time before, the time of building and waiting, the time of preparation and faith. Let your mind rest on this image, a massive wooden vessel taking shape slowly over the years, a man and his family working steadily day by day, a world carrying on around them, unaware or unconcerned, and over it all, the patient purpose of God, working out his plan in his time. Noah built the ark. He gathered the materials. He followed the instructions. He did not know exactly when the flood would come, but he knew it would come. And so he prepared. He trusted. He obeyed. This is the story so far. This is where we rest tonight, in the days of Noah before the flood, in the time of preparation, of faithful work, of quiet trust, in the space between promise and fulfillment, where faith is tested and proven. Sleep comes more easily when we remember that God keeps his word, that his timing is perfect even when it seems slow to us. that obedience brings peace, even in the midst of a troubled world. Noah found rest in obedience. He found peace in following God's command. And in that obedience, in that faithfulness, in that patient trust, he found the strength to do what no one else could do, to believe what no one else would believe, to prepare for what no one else thought was coming. The ark stood there, growing toward completion, the purpose for which it was designed drawing closer day by day, the salvation it would offer drawing nearer, though the world did not know it. Rest now in the faithfulness of God, in the patience of His timing, in the certainty of His word. Like Noah, trust that what God has promised, He will perform. Like Noah, obey even when obedience is difficult. Like Noah, walk with God. The flood has not yet come in our story. The door has not yet closed. The rain has not yet fallen. But the preparation is underway. The ark is being built. The faithful few are trusting. And God's plan is unfolding, slowly and surely, like the dawn that comes after the longest night. May you rest in this knowledge. May you sleep in this peace. May you trust in this God who warned Noah, who instructed Noah, who saved Noah and his family from the judgment that came upon the earth. The days of Noah, the time before the flood, the season of preparation and faith, the years of quiet obedience and patient trust. This is where our story rests tonight. This is where we leave Noah for now, building and believing, trusting and obeying, walking with God in a world that had turned away from Him. May you walk with God as Noah walked. May you trust as he trusted. May you rest as His name promised rest. And may you wake tomorrow refreshed, remembering that God is faithful, His word is true, and His purposes will be accomplished in His time. Rest well. Amen.